Hey everyone, I'm here to show you how to put together your Barnabas racer today, and I'm going to start off with what you see before me. I have the chassis of the racer, I have two continuous servo motors, and then I have four very skinny, longer shafted screws, as well as the smaller of the nuts that are available in the kit. So I have four of each of those, and I'm going to start by putting the motors onto the chassis. And when you're doing this, there's a few ways you can do it. So you can have the axle of the motor closer to the front of the chassis, or you can have it more towards the back with the servo wires kind of sticking out the back as well. I prefer it this way. This allows your wheels to sit further back onto the chassis of the car, which then gives you a little more stability, because this kit does have a habit of being a little top heavy or a little front heavy and tipping from time to time, so trying to mitigate that as best as we can by putting the wheels further back on the car should help us out with that. Now the actual fastening of the motors is a little bit tricky because of how small the nuts are in particular. So typically what I'll do is I will try and get the screw in from the outside. This might take me a couple tries. I'll get the screw in from the outside, and then I will try to put the nut on while it is level. Not the easiest. And then after I've gotten it on, I'll just kind of like continue and then once it's finger tight like that, I will go ahead and use a screwdriver, tighten it up the rest of the way. Notice I have my index finger trying to push down on the nut there to keep it in place while I do this. And you want to try your best to get this as tight as possible without stripping your screw. As you go through the class and you are actually using your racer and you have it moving left, right, back, forwards, it's hitting some things here and there, these screws tend to get a little loose. So if they're very tight initially, you probably won't have that problem. But if there's any looseness in that screw, it's probably going to be exacerbated over the course of the class. You'll have to go, end up going back, taking off the wheel, retightening that screw, and it's a bit of a hassle. So try your best to get it as tight as you can when you're first building the car, so you don't have to deal with that in the future. Alright, I'm just going to go ahead and do the other one for this side and then put the other motor on, and then we'll move on to the next portion. You guys see that? So try to keep it as level as possible so I can put the nut on, and then I can just and then tighten it further. Okay. Alright, there we go. Got our two motors. Okay, so now that we have our motors attached to the chassis of our racers, we're going to try to fasten the wheels onto the motors. We are going to be using these screws to do so. They're kind of shorter, fat, like flat-headed screws. Now if we look at the wheels closely, we can see that on one side it's flat completely. On the other side there's this little hole, this little indentation, and that actually conveniently fits right onto the motor, like so. And then we can put these screws in and just screw them into the motor. Now this can be a little more difficult than I'm making it look right now. A lot of times, because you may not be using a screwdriver like this one, you may be using a smaller like mini screwdriver that doesn't give you as much torque which makes it very difficult to screw the wheels all the way into the motor. Notice in between the motor and the wheel you don't see any of the white on the, like you do here. You don't see any of that, so it's on pretty tightly. And that's fairly important, as not having your wheels on tight can lead your wheels to wiggle back and forth as they move, and that can create some unwanted motion. So you may have robots that don't move quite as straight as you would like, or one wheel at its top speed will move faster than the other wheel because of this apparent wobble. So you try to minimize that as best you can. Keep in mind that these robots will not be perfect no matter what you try, unless you give it several more hours than we have to spare in class. But to make a robot that has perfectly aligned wheels that are completely flush tight, it's not very reasonable, but we still do want to try our best to get them as tight as we can. So if you are using those mini screwdrivers in the class, make sure that you also, as the teacher, have something with a little more length so you can get a little more torque on those screws and you can help the students out as needed. Alright, so now we're going to be attaching this front wheel to our chassis. We're going to be finally using these thicker screws as well as the nuts that come with them. And you'll notice that this is just a three-wheeled car. We have extra spots to put 2 more motors here and 2 more wheels, which would make us which would make this car a 4-wheel drive vehicle. Unfortunately, that draws too much power from the Arduino board, which means that is not a possibility for us. So we're using 2-wheel drive, and we're having a 3rd wheel that is free to move and turn. And this section of the build, I feel, is a lot easier than the last 2. Have a lot less complaints or cries for help in class for this wheel than I do for these wheels. So we're just going to take the fat screws, stick them through, and fasten them with the nuts that we have. If I can get it on there. All right. I'm kind of using the same method as before. Just like a little extra tight. Okay, I think that's good. These also have a bit of a habit of falling off if they're not tight enough. Try to keep that in mind. Alright, see if realign these. Good. And do this just one at a time. Okay, there we go. So now we've got our car to put together, and then the next thing is to start putting our hardware on top of it.